represent the areas, and that's what the Peters projection does. And it was a deliberate attempt to subvert the kind of implicit colonial view that the Mercator projection actually represented. And you can see that more strongly if you take a map where population becomes one axis of the graph, and that the area of a country is represented by its population. And then you begin to see, you know, a very different view of the world. North America ceases to be a dominant place. Australia and New Zealand virtually disappear, and India and China become enormous. This is a map by the Surrealists in the 1930s, who had particular political views of the world, and they were very, very fond of Russia because communism hadn't become the black word that it subsequently became. And they thought, well, Alaska is near Russia, so we'll give that quite a lot of importance. So Alaska's enormous. They didn't like the USA, so they've taken it out of the map completely. And Canada has bumped into Mexico. Australia, apparently, they didn't like because it's got much smaller than New Zealand. So, you know, it's a subjective map according to their political views, and it's obviously humorous. Here's another political map. This is called the Palestinian Archipelago, and it's a kind of critical comment on the way that Israel has divided the occupied territories, so that they've become islands to those people that live on them. So a very powerful kind of political map, but also reflecting the fact that if you live in one of these patches, to get to another one is incredibly difficult, as hard as crossing the water. And here's one for those of you that like commuting. This is a subjective map of travel. And it's actually very, very useful, because if you want to commute to London, you discover that it's quicker to go from Milan to London than it is to go from Newcastle to London. So you can happily commute from Milan, and it's better than going from Newcastle, or indeed from, certainly Penzance is even further away from London than Milan in this map, because it's based on time of travel. And that's really all you want to know if you're commuting. You don't really care about the distance. In fact, you can commute from New York and Montreal with a little bit more hassle than going from Penzance, but not much more. And that's quite extraordinary, really. And you can see that Paris, Dusseldorf, Amsterdam and Milan all fall within a circle that is quicker to get to London than from Fishguard or Aberdeen or Inverness. So there you have it. We live in a very extended country because of the transport. Also, this is a very nice little humorous comment on Google. This is a Google pointer, which you must be familiar with, but this is if you zoomed into a Google map at the maximum scale possible, this is how big the pointer would be relative to the real surroundings. And this little art project, they just took this pointer around and photographed it in corresponding points to where pointers existed in Boston, I think. So a nice little bit of humour, but pointing out the limits of the map. And again, this mapping is now beginning to apply to the intricacies of our lives. This is another humorous image. It's if your wardrobe could speak. But it's based on a real concept, which is that of RFID tags, which can be built into clothing now. So you can just scan your mobile phone, if it's got a near-field reader, over a piece of clothing, and the clothing will speak to you. And it will tell you things. I'm actually working on a project that does this, so it's not far-fetched. It's within the feasibility of our technologies. But there's also this thing called the Internet of Things, which is the next stage of the Internet, where everything has an address, and everything can become a repository of memory or information. And we're going to move into a world where every object in your house knows about itself and can tell you about itself, or about something where the context it's been in. That's quite scary, and I think this image really does scare people, because you don't want your wardrobe to tell you everything about it, particularly I fell down drunk and you tore me and all this. So There you go. Another subjective map, and this is quite an interesting one. It's an economic map. It puts the flags of countries whose gross domestic product is exactly equivalent to the particular state in which the flag is placed. And that's quite scary, because here's the industrial might of the US exemplified. All these countries fit neatly into one state. Each flag is a whole country, and its domestic product is the equivalent of the economic product of that one state in the USA. So a very vivid kind of coming together of information here. And a very old map, this is another political map as it happens. It's a view of France from England, and it views France as this vain old lady. So the map is quite accurate, but the old lady fits within it. So GPS mapping, being used creatively by artists, some come at it very literally. This is the biggest drawing ever done, and it spans the entire world. And the way it was done was the guy sent a GPS device off with a UPS package and told it where to go. And he plotted where he wanted it to go so it would draw a giant head on the world. Now, a nice idea, but I have reservations about calling it art. But it does show that these technologies have huge potentials. And of course, subjective mapping is not a new thing in terms of artists using it. Richard Long, British artist who kind of invented one aspect of land art, this is one of his first pieces. He just walked up and down, up and down, up and down on the landscape in a straight line until he'd created what he called a sculpture, which is this track. So this direct interaction between movement and the land. And in effect, Songlines is going to do something similar, except you may or may not see physical traces of it. And just the last one to show that maps don't have to be kind of visual simulacrums of the world. This is a navigational chart from Micronesia, and although it just looks like bits of bamboo tied together, it gives sailors entirely accurate information about tides and winds so they can navigate between islands. So maps do not have to look like the thing they represent, but they can contain enormously useful information. And this is also true of the human body. It's got all its organs intact, but they're very politely changed in size. The brain sees the hands as much bigger than they are because they're full of nerve endings. And this is really tragic because we did draw the match with USA because the goalkeeper thought his hands were bigger than they are. This is actually a scientific theory that I saw in the paper yesterday. But we do have all these nerve endings in our lips, our tongues, our hands, the very, very sensitive parts of the body, and the brain sees them as much more important than other bits of our body. So, even in terms of sacrificing a limb or something, you instinctively use parts of your body you don't mind too much about when you're trying to protect yourself. You don't do that, you do that, etc. So we have a mental map of the body that is equally subjective. So I'm now going to, having given you that kind of background, I'm going to talk a bit about the specific project, Songlines. This has been supported by the cycling officer, Andrew Selkeld, in Leicester City Council. And he was originally hoping that he could loan us bikes for the pre-Olympics that they were getting into Leicester. Now he is getting some for a college, and they will be available.